Hello and welcome to the Empowering Law Firm Leaders podcast, where we sit down with experts across the legal sector to discover the mindsets, behaviours, skills and digital tools that are needed to run a successful modern law firm. I'm Amy Bruce, host and head of marketing at Osprey Approach, and today I'm joined by both the authors of the Legal MBA, who between them have over 30 years of experience working with law firms and senior leadership teams. With expertise across practice management, strategy, marketing, innovation and process improvement, I'm excited to welcome James Markham and Darren Mee. Thank you for joining me.
Good to be here.
Welcome.
So today we'll be focusing and discussing how law firms can master the business of law. We'll cover how to create a strategy that helps you stay competitive and tips for ensuring your team are aligned. And we'll also discuss why firms should have a service proposition, how to create them effectively, as well as the tech tools you should be investing in for long-term success. So thank you, James and Darren, for joining me. We'll be diving into some of your best practices and top tips that feature in your book that I have here that you'll probably not be able to see, but is in the background of your images there. So we'll dive deep into that in a second. But first, please just tell me, each of you, about your background and your experience that's led you to where you are today. James, we'll come to you first.
The immediate logistics of who's going to go first. Thanks, Amy. I think great to be here, and how good to have us all together talking about it. My favourite topic, the Legal MBA. So a bit about me. So I originally trained as an accountant, so I'm a non-lawyer. That's probably one to get out of the way early doors in a podcast that might be being seen by lawyers. And worked with Darren at a firm called, as it was, Baker Tilly, and then and now RSM. I've got very, very fond memories, I don't know about you, Darren, of my own MBA at Henley. I think, you train as a professional, for me as an accountant, or a lawyer as a lawyer, and you get very, very good at the technical expertise, so for me, say the accounting. And I think that MBA really helped me sort of just appreciate the wider elements of running a business, any business, I suppose. I think as an accountant, you've got a tendency to just see everyone else as a cost. And so I think actually early doors in your career, understanding marketing adds value, HR adds value, etc. I think it's really, really good. Darren and I worked together at Baker Tilly. We worked together outside of Baker Tilly, and then I had a bit of a run working for sort of big law firms. So first the LA Piper and Hogan Lovells, most recently at Denton's. So I had a directorate at Denton's covering things like, see if I can remember them all now, practice management, commercial finance, legal project management and innovation. I think in terms of the Legal MBA itself, I think that the seed of that was planted when I was at Hogan Lovells. I think increasingly sort of just saw these different silos developing. I think at the time it was either legal or legal design thinking, like very, very focused. And what was missing was that breadth, that kind of broader context of how all these things hang together. But I think like most bright ideas, I think I wrote half a chapter and then it sat on a shelf as a poorly a bright idea, but poorly conceived and not at all executed for a little while. Didn't go anywhere. And then Darren and I sort of got back in touch during lockdown. I think just at the beginning of this podcast, I might have described us as each other's emotional support animals. I don't know how either of us feel about that, but I think that's where it started. And we were kind of kicking around, well, what should we do? And it sort of turned into, should we, how do we work together again, and how do we produce something? And I think we both had this sense, particularly at that time, when we weren't allowed to leave our houses, that the world was changing. That I think lawyers wanted to better understand how their firms work, that broader kind of commercial context. I think the firms themselves wanted them to be more commercial, a little bit more openness about how partners make money in the firm and what that means to be a viable, successful firm. And I think as well, increasingly just seeing that there were just new and different ways of providing that information, that kind of training, so sort of more digitally delivered rather than sort of more traditional face-to-face classroom-based learnings. And now here we are.
Yeah, absolutely. The rest is history. Darren, where did you start? What's your experience and what's led you to where you are today?
Yeah, very similar. So as James mentioned, we worked together at one of the large accountancy firms. We had a broad base of clients from lots of different industries and sectors, but increasingly, I would say since the last recession, since about 2008, 9, 10, working more and more with law firms, to the point that by the mid 2010s, that was pretty much our sole focus. So very similar background to James. Guess the thing I'd also flag, I'd been a partner in one of those big practices as well. So working with lawyers day in, day out, I kind of feel the pain that you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to have a deep technical expertise and deep knowledge in whatever your specialism is. For us, it was consulting. For the lawyers that we work with, it's their legal discipline. But then there's all this other stuff, getting new clients, building teams, managing the finances, trying to get your operations and processes quite slick. All that other stuff, the business of professional services. So I guess when we came to write the book, we felt that lawyers in particular had been a bit shortchanged in their business education. You go through law school, you learn an awful lot about the law. You come into a legal practice, you do your LPC or equivalent. Again, more law. And then as you get more and more senior, you're just expected to have picked up all this stuff about strategy and marketing and business development and pricing and profitability and finance and operations and process and technology and blah, 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 blah. The list goes on and on and on. So we wanted to help because we felt like the lawyers don't really have that. They don't have a source to go through, to equip themselves with those skills. And we hope with the Legal MBA Essentials book and with the academy that's coming soon, that will equip them with the essentials of what they need to do to master the business of law.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great summary of the book. It really does cover the foundations of everything that you need to know about the business of law. And I've got so many scribbles in here. There's so many questions I wanted to ask you, but we've had to narrow it down. But I'd love to start with some quick takeaways for listeners. Let's say they only have 5 minutes. I'd love them to stay to the end. I hope that they do, but let's say they've got 5 minutes. Within the book, you say that the beauty of working with so many firms is that you see all the common pitfalls, but you also see examples of exceptional practice. Can you share your top 3 examples of the exceptional practice that you've seen, maybe most recent or maybe the ones that have stuck out to you the most? Darren, we'll come back to you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's an awful lot, and I guess over the years, I've become clearer with my thinking on this. I think there are surface level things that people do really well, and then there are the foundational fundamental things that people do really well. I'd put within those superficial things, getting their financial hygiene right, getting their bills out on a timely basis, managing WIP, all those kind of things. Really, really important, but somewhat addressing symptoms rather than causes. They're not the deep things. The ones that I see, the firms and the fee earners and partners that I see that really get this right, start by answering 2 questions and answering them really, really clearly. And those 2 questions are, who is it that we serve? What do we offer? And I had a former mentor that said, if you can answer those 2 questions really well, everything else about running your business runs an awful lot more smoothly. The mistakes that we see, or the things that make that challenging, are not being precise with those two questions, or the answers to those 2 questions. It can be really tempting, and I understand this is counterintuitive, but it's really tempting to just think, well, we've got an awful lot of breadth, we can help lots and lots of different types of clients, which is correct. But should you help lots of different types of clients? I think about it as, if I were going in for, say, heart surgery, I'd want the specialist heart surgeon. I wouldn't want someone that also does ingrowing toenails and various other bits and pieces. I want the specialist in that area. I think when it comes to marketing communications as well, you can be much more focused and much more relevant if you're clear on who your target audience is, and that comes from that first question of being clear on who you're focused on helping as well. saw a really good example the other day that someone said, have you ever written a love letter to someone that starts with "to whom it may concern"? Which is, of course, ludicrous. Of course you wouldn't. But then with our marketing communications, we do that. And in many cases within the professions, we go even further. We don't even talk about the person we're writing the love letter to. We say, we do this and we're that, and we've won this number of awards, and we're 150 years old, and we've got this number of partners, and blah, 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 blah. We talk about ourselves. If you just think of that from a love letter perspective, if you just, to whom it may concern, I'm brilliant, best regards, that's not really going to go anywhere. So being really clear on who it is you serve, because in professional services, we are here to serve. You need that humility. And then secondly, being really clear on what it is that we offer. I guess we'll get into that when we get into some of the service proposition stuff, but it's so important, and it's really easy to do it wrong. It's really easy to just talk about, my specialism is this. I'm an expert lawyer in employment law or M&A or blah 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 blah. So yeah, I'd say the ones that have really got it right have really nailed those two questions really well.
Yeah, I think you assume a lot of that stuff. Like, a lot of law firms are continuing and assuming that they know a lot of that, but actually, especially as you grow, making sure everybody is really clear and on the same boat with what that means and who you serve and how you do that is super clear. And like you said, it makes your marketing far more impactful if you can be really specific about the problems that you solve. I feel like your example about ingrown toenails was too close to mind, and I know you've recently run a marathon, so maybe that's quite personal, but that aside, I think that's a great place to start. I think those two questions are really great. James, what exceptional practice have you seen in your time working with law firms?
Yeah, I mean, I think one that I think generally blown away. I don't know if things can generally be exceptional, but I'm gonna run with this. Yeah, we talk in the book around the importance of sort of prioritization and delegation. I think, to your point, Darren, that all becomes a lot easier if you know like what you're doing and who you're doing it for. I think one of the quirks of law firms is that, particularly senior partners that are managing a team or managing a department, there is this mix of the fee earning and the management, and the need to kind of get on top of that kind of prioritization and that ability to delegate is really key. And actually, at that top level, I think generally partners are pretty good at that, because they have to be to get to that point. Otherwise, they just run out of hours in the day. I mean, really specifically, I mean, I remember I worked with a practice group leader, and I still, this is years ago now, and I still don't actually know how she did it. She's balancing a full fee earning portfolio. There's no deduction because you have a management role, full fee earning responsibilities as a full equity partner, managing a pretty sizable practice group and all the people management issues, the rallying the peer partners around whatever it is that we're trying to achieve that week or that month. And she's a single mum to 3 kids as well. And I genuinely just don't know how she did it. And in truth, there's a little bit, I think, in what Darren was saying around, I think she had real clarity in each of those kind of 3 areas about what was she doing. She knew which clients she was serving, and I think really importantly, which ones she was not. Knew kind of with clarity, what is that practice group trying to achieve, and knew what she was trying to do with the kids. And I think then adding in the support system around that to be able to delegate that, some of those responsibilities away, the wraparound care for the kids, or the, having senior associates being able to run point on key client accounts without having to be in all of those meetings. I think as a general point, I think at that top level within any law firm, I think those senior partners, those managing partners, are all really good at that, but sort of to a point of extremity. Just one in mind of just how you balance those 3 different buckets. I just slightly blown away by it, to be honest.
What a superwoman.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right. It's it's about knowing who you serve, and that allows you to say no to the things that are just a distraction. And she clearly didn't have any time in the day for distractions in any sense of the word. So it's just being very clear on, I'm not dealing with that, I'm not looking at that, I'm not spending my time on that. And then once you're really clear on that, you can then hire the best people to do the best job, because you know exactly what they need to achieve. And whether that's additional lawyers or growing your team, or whether that's experts in HR and marketing and all that good stuff, I think that is a brilliant place to start. So you say at the start of the book, the Legal MBA addresses what it takes to be successful in the business of law rather than the practice of law. The book really does cover all the fundamentals across strategy, positioning, operations. But I'd love to start with the strategy. So to help firms be competitive against the other 10,000 law firms in the UK, you discuss the strategies needed to differentiate. How can firms avoid the classic answer of people when asked what makes them different, what makes them successful? James, we'll come back to you.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and maybe we could have written a much shorter book if we'd have just said people, right? We could have saved 8 chapters of text, right? And I think you're right. I think you're right to call it out. That I think that is sort of the go-to or the classic answer. I think my view, I think probably our view really is, if everyone's saying it, it can't really be that much of a differentiator, you know, in the eyes of clients and potential clients. And I think the real trick, and Darren, you spoke about this just now, is I think you know, to your love letter to whoever it may concern, you've got to step outside of that internal view of the firm. You know, whether it's its people or it's its processes or its culture. Culture is another kind of classic putting quote marks everywhere on the website, and that will win us work kind of shortcut. And I think you've got to look externally, and I think that means putting your feet in the shoes of your client and talking directly to their needs. So, you know, there's an obvious bit about, you know, can you describe and explain the legal elements of your work to the client? But I think it's the how can you relate those legal elements to the wider transaction, or its importance to you know, it's often, you know, the emotional needs of the client. So I don't know, like, you know, if you're in residential conveyancing and you're helping a family move halfway across the country, knowing the importance of getting them in their new house before the start of term, and being able to relate to that and the emotional pressures as things drag on, and getting really stressed about that, I think that's really important. Or, you know, keep it in, say, a family context, managing the emotions around a client that's going through a difficult divorce, you know, much broader than the strict, pure, narrow legal sense of what you're being engaged to do. But can you talk to your client about that and relate to them and help them understand that? I think in a B2B context, if law firms selling to other firms, other businesses, to my money, and Darren, appreciate if you've got a different take on this. I think the strongest differentiator that firms can lean on is by focusing on an industry or a sector. You know, you maybe geography, there are other ones there, but I think for me it's industry and sector. I think, you know, being able to understand that, you know, I understand, you know, the cryptocurrency ecosystem, or NHS general practitioners, or whatever. Like, I think understanding those wider industry contexts and dynamics within which the legal transaction sits, I think that's the key differentiator. And talking about those broader elements, rather than the, you know, to whoever it may concern, I'm great, my people's great, my culture's great. I think I would generally, you know, hang my hat on industry and sector in a B2B context. I don't know, Darren, if you've got a contrary view or a broader view on that.
No, very much agree.
We should probably write a book together.
Yeah, it's the F word, focus. Whether it's industry or sector, which you know, as you say, James, is the easiest ones to identify, or it's focusing on some other, you know, whether it's geography or need or size of organization. I always shudder when I hear we're a full service firm, sector agnostic, work with everyone from owner managed businesses up to the Fortune 1000 or FTSE 100. It might sound great. It might sound like you're casting your net really wide, but what a client or a buyer will be hearing is they'll work with anyone. It doesn't matter. Back to the heart surgeon analogy. The narrower and narrower you can make that specialism, you don't make the market smaller. Well, you do make the market smaller, but you make your chances of growing even larger. You know, there's a James and I both come from a process improvement background years and years and years ago. There's a theory called the theory of constraints. And in any problem, whether it's an engineering problem, a people problem, or whatever else, if you're trying to improve that process, you focus on the bottleneck, you focus on the constraint. If you focus on improving other bits of it, you just make that bottleneck even more pronounced. And when it comes to growing your firm or growing your book of business, there really are only two constraints there. There's the size of the market, and then there's the proportion of that market that you actually can access or have at that one time. And I've very, very rarely, if ever, seen the constraint to law firm growth being the size of a market. So if you go narrower and narrower and narrower, you do cut down the size of that market, but you can become more and more effective with in terms of the proportion of that market that you can tackle, by being more focused with your language, by being more focused at the type of events that you turn up at, rather than turning up at the opening of an envelope. You can be more focused with your hiring strategy. You know, if you say, not just healthcare, we are going to be the experts for M&A, for buying and selling of chiropractic care centres, for example. I'm only saying that because I've got a bit of a dodgy back at the moment, lifting the kids up this weekend. You can go out and you can go to the chiropractic events. You can hire people that have got healthcare or, you know, some experience of buying and selling chiropractic practices. You can go and advertise in the UK Journal of Chiropractic Medicine, or whatever it might be. You can go and download the top 1,000 chiropractic practices in the UK, and you can work down that list, rather than going to some generic networking event, handing out 20 business cards, and no one's really that interested because you're just one of and another corporate lawyers that I could be talking to. You can also start to then develop propositions that are really relevant to chiropractors as well. So yeah, it comes back to that focus point. I'd say that's the easiest way to differentiate. You differentiate on the basis of who you serve and what you offer, rather than how well you do it. Because, like the people point, no one puts on their website, we're fairly moderate lawyers and we've got fairly average people. No one does that. Everyone says we're great. Everyone says we've got great people, so you don't stand out. But not everyone says we are the #1 firm to go to for buying and selling chiropractors.
I think there's a point on that as well. I think maybe to square a circle with, you know, potentially people from big law firms as well, you know, the big globals or whatever. I think in terms of the Legal MBA and how we have written that, it's for the individual partner or aspiring partner that's building their practice, their book of business. You can absolutely have the focus strategy you've just gone through, Darren, working in a big law firm, and you know, your niche might be, I serve, you know, multinational corporations in the X sector, Y industry, whatever, multinational chiropractors. Let's stretch that metaphor to breaking point, right? And therefore you have to be in a firm that can give that global footprint to be able to do that. But I think to just kind of be in those big law firms and just kind of dining out on the brand name of whoever, I think that's really quite limiting. And I think you can end up in essentially just these very kind of commoditized, you know, price sensitive, battling in pitches to just win, and you just have to win on price because your website says we're big and our people are great, and so do the other 6 firms. So I think if you look at it from the perspective of the individual partner, there is absolutely space in those kind of big global firms, those big global platforms, to build that niche, to build that focus, to build that understanding. And I think that's where your career starts taking off and you start building that out far better than just kind of running along the tagtails of. I think the thing is your point, just now, I've never met a firm that said, do you know what, our people aren't great. Like no one has put that on the table as an option. So, you know, it's table stakes. It doesn't need saying because everyone's saying it for you, right? It's just assumed.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there is an important point, Amy, just before we move on, because we've really laid it on thick, this point that you have to be focused, you have to be clear on who you serve and what you offer. Now, there are lots of firms that have been extremely successful without doing that. So when James and I say you have to do it, obviously you don't have to. You can carry on doing things the way they've been done for the last 100 years or so. But a bit like we saw with COVID, things they are changing, and you know, there've been a lot of pressures over recent years. You know, the big cost of living crisis and the just inflationary impact that's had on well, and the red hot war for talent has driven up associate salaries, and you've seen these newly qualified solicitor jobs being advertised for 100 grand a year or 150 grand a year with, you know, practically zero experience. That's a big macroeconomic change that's coming for law firms. You see the generational changes that are coming in with, I think I just about fit in as a 43-year-old. I think I just about fit in as a millennial, which came as a bit of a shock to me. But the generational impacts of millennials and Gen Zs coming through that perhaps don't want to work 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week in exchange for a really large salary, that perhaps the partnership route isn't as attractive to them. Maybe they've got other interests. You know, these are big macro changes that are coming before we even get onto the dreaded AI word that seems to be bandied around all the time. There are things that are coming, and we can do the sticking plaster thing of, right, well, everyone needs to do an extra 100 hours, you know, billable hours every year, or we're going to sack Mabel who pushes the tea trolley round. You know, little tactical changes that aren't really going to turn the needle. Or we can actually get to the bottom of this and focus on having a strategy that makes us stand out. And I would say focus is a key way to do that without having to crack the whip even harder or sack people or make little tactical changes that aren't going to make that much difference.
Yeah, I think that's a great context to put that in, because of course you can continue to do the same thing, but it's only going to get harder. You don't want your life to become harder to achieve the same, if not diminishing, results. So I think that's a great context to put that in, that actually having this focus allows you to grow quicker. Even if you don't want to grow, just maintain easier. And I think going back to your point about focus, ultimately what that allows you to do is know your client inside out and back to front. And you need to make sure that your communications, whether that's in your marketing or whether it's via your lawyers, resonates exactly with your audience. And that's going to make them go, well, I can't choose anyone else. I have to choose this firm because they know me inside out. And if you're trying to be that to everybody, it's impossible to know everybody's needs, challenges, problems, why they get up in the morning. But if you can really nail that, then those people will just go, well, of course I have to choose you. Of course I have to work with you. So yeah, brilliant point. In the chapter about marketing strategy, you discussed that everything you put out into the market, so all touch points with potential and existing clients, influence your people's perception about your brand and your services and your prices. It's not just what the marketing department shares, it's not just the communications, but the whole team that have that impact on the firm's reputation. How do you make sure that your team's behaviours and habits align with that strategy, especially when you're growing and things are changing? But even so, how do you make sure that everyone is on the same page? James, I'll come to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think maybe to look at it from the, well, what are the common mistakes, and then flip it back again at the end. I think there's 5 things that I think firms get wrong with their strategy, and in terms of that embedding point with the team. The first is they don't have one. I think you probably need to start there. You can't embed something you don't have. The second is that there's a strategy but no one actually knows about it. So again, you're not going to get that alignment, or maybe variations on that. The strategy is understood by the senior management team, but it's not socialised or sort of communicated outside of the ivory tower. The third point, or the third mistake, I think, is that there isn't actually sufficient buy-in from the partners. You know, I think, you know, I think there is a mistaken view in a lot of firms that you know, you have, say, the 3 senior partners, they decide what we're going to do, and we go, right, we're going over here, and then everyone is just going to follow them. But actually, and I actually think the partnership model is a strength. I think it's a really positive thing, and it is collegiate, and it does require kind of consensus-based decision making. But that does mean you've got some work to go and get that consensus. You need all of your partners kind of singing from the same hymn sheet. And to some of the conversation we've just had around the kind of the full service law firms, when you start saying we're going here and we're not going there, you're going to have disagreements on that. I think it's really important in formulating a strategy, you discuss those, you air those, you come to some sort of conclusion on those. But fundamentally, you need all of your partners, you need cabinet responsibility around we're going left, we're not going right. So yeah, you haven't got a strategy, you've got one, you've not communicated it, you've got one, you communicated it, but frankly, you've got partners undermining it because they're not bought into it. I think the fourth is then that if you're doing this as a top-down exercise, it doesn't sufficiently align with practice group specialisms or industry specialisms or sectoral, however the firm is structured. And then I think that then starts meaning that the people that are on the ground, so your fee earners or your business services staff, they can't see the connection. You know, you've got this lovely slide deck and you've done all your town halls and you've put it on your monthly newsletter for the last 6 months or whatever. People go, okay, I know what the strategy is. But they can't see how does it relate to the real estate team, and how does it relate to the corporate M&A team, and how does it relate to the chiropractor specialism that we've got going over there, because he's read our book and he's doing a great job. You know, if you can't make the strategy speak at those levels, you'll lose them. You'll lose people. And I think the final bit then is strategy is about saying yes to stuff, right? We're going to go do that. We're going to go over here. We're going to be really big in this particular area. But by implication, and I think really you should try and make this explicit rather than implicit, it also means saying no to other things. You know, if you're going left, you can't go right. And so what that means then is when people can see a strategy that exists, has been communicated, that they can see that the partners are all bought into it, at least publicly, if not privately. They can see the connection to their practice area, and they can see, because it's sufficiently detailed and prescriptive, to say, this is what I should be doing, this is what I shouldn't be doing in terms of strategic alignment. That's then when you start getting the embedding. I think that too often firms can go, oh, we're going to do strategy, and they'll get a consultant in, like what you can have one of me and Darren if you like, they're both of us, and we'll spend lots of time with like 2 people, and we'll come up with a slide deck, and then it sits in a cupboard and nothing happens. Actually, from that point all the way through, it's quite a lot of work, and getting that buy-in and that advocacy for the strategy that then people can see. And then I think it becomes at that very detailed level of what should James Markham be doing on a Tuesday morning. You don't have to run that up the line. You have to go back into like the strategy committee and go, you know, should I be doing a podcast with Amy Bruce and Darren me? You know, if you've got the clarity, you know what you should be doing. And so you can have autonomy within the strategy that's aligned, and you get that behavioural drive. But it is, I think, incumbent upon senior management to do quite a lot of work to get to that point. So yeah, that's where I go with on strategy.
Yeah, I mean, strategy is not an easy task. You know, it's not a case of just throwing some words on a page and we're all going to be fine. And I love your point 4 about how does it apply? Almost like you communicate with your clients via marketing, you have to resonate. It has to resonate internally as well. You almost have to market and sell your strategy and your plan internally. Everyone has to be brought in. I love that point. And I think your point 5 about being super focused and knowing when to say no. I think what tends to happen is there's ambiguity and nobody really knows, is this where I should be doing? Is this where I should be spending my time? And that ambiguity creates friction and it creates confusion. And what employees need to be is empowered to make those decisions and feel really backed by it and feel really clear by the strategy. So I think that's a really, really great point. Darren, we'll come to you on how to align those habits and the strategy throughout the firm.
Yeah, sure. I suppose to follow on from one of the points James made, you know, strategy is about saying yes to some stuff. It's also about saying no to some things. The unintended consequence of that is you are going to say no to some really good ideas. There's a great interview. It's with Steve Jobs, where he used to do these big town hall meetings and open up the floor to questions. And there's a particularly prickly software engineer that gets up and asks him a question of, I think he starts with, it's clear you don't know what you're talking about, which is always a nice way to start a question. Can you explain the rationale why we canned this particular technology project? And I think Steve Jobs starts with, look, you can please some of the people some of the time, but not all the people all the time. And you know, he's very not apologetic, but very empathetic with the guy that says, look, this it's a great technology, and you know, this particular technology that we've canned does certain things better than alternatives, but you have to look at the wider whole. You have to look at how does this fit in with what our customers, or in this case our clients, actually want. So it's a particularly challenging thing to manage when you have really bright people on the tools, and within professional services firms and within law firms you have really bright people that have really good ideas, and managing that challenge between here's a really good idea and something that I'm passionate about and I want to do, but it doesn't add to where we're actually trying to go. I'm not going to lie, there's tension there, and that tension needs managing, but it either means the strategy's wrong, or we shouldn't be doing this thing, and it's an even harder task to address within a law firm where, you know, as James had said, it often is still a partnership model now, and it is still really collegiate. And in a 200 partner firm, you've got potentially 200 owners. There's a reason why big corporates and big PLCs, not every shareholder gets an equal vote as to where the strategy should go. It does need to have clarity. So it is challenging, but I think having a really clear vision, a really clear strategy, and then being consistent with how you execute that is really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because you are going to have to say no to some good ideas, because like you said, everyone's got different perspectives, everyone's coming from those different areas. I interviewed Simon McCrum, and he said very much the same thing, in that if everyone goes off doing their own good ideas, that's not going to have an impact on the business as a whole. But if all those people have really great ideas about the same thing, that's magical. Like, we could really make some strides if everyone has those great ideas but applied to the same strategy and same direction. So yeah, I think that's a great way.
And maybe more practically, it's a case of we're doing these things now, and we have to defer these other things. You know, within law firms, within any organization, you only have finite resource, so there will always be more good ideas than there is resource to execute them. So sometimes it's not a case of saying no, but it's a case of saying not now. And that's where the priority within our book, as we go on, prioritization becomes more and more important. If you have enough resource to do all those ideas, great, but it'd be better to do 2 or 3 things really well than to muck up 15 or 20. And that's one of those pitfalls that we see through no fault of anyone's effort or talent. They just want to do lots and lots of things, but again, it's back to focus. Not necessarily just focusing on who you serve and what you do, but what are we going to prioritize? What are we going to start with?
Yeah, and I mean, having too many good ideas is not a bad problem to have, as long as you know where to spend your time right now. I think, yeah, that's great. Put it on the back burner. We can always revisit that when we have the space, when things change. Yeah, I love that. I know you're keen to get on this, so I love the chapter about service propositions. Darren, can you explain just what they are and how you create a good one? Let's start with the basics.
Yeah, I think for the most part within the book, most chapters are fairly self-explanatory. Everyone kind of knows what strategy is. Everyone knows what finance is. Everyone knows what marketing is. I think when it comes to service propositions, it's potentially the area that's most vague. It's also the area that gets least coverage. But a service proposition is simply the thing that you offer to your clients. And anyone listening to this or watching this now, I'm sure the reaction is, well, we know what that is. We offer employment law stuff, or we offer regulatory compliance services, or we offer, you know, a wills and probate service. Yes, kind of, but again, this is often about a subtle distinction between what is my technical specialism? So what is the legal the technical underpinning, legal underpinning of this, and what is actually the thing that I'm offering to my client? And I've tried to make this within the book, tried to make it clear as to what a good service proposition looks like. First of all, it should address a particular problem or need for a client. So rather than talking about employment law, maybe it's something that's focused on a discrimination challenge for a particular audience. It should have a way of articulating not only what the problem is, but how we can help with a solution. It should also have some, not reams and reams of detail, but it should be able to paint the picture of how a client goes from point A to point B, which is, I have a problem, I don't know how the heck to solve it, through to actually that problem's now gone away and it's all sorted. Well, we'll go through this stage, then this stage, then this stage, then this stage. We've done it 1,000 times before. You can have total confidence that we'll take you from point A to point B. One of the most unpopular opinions amongst law firms, I think it should have a fixed fee associated with it, or at least a value-based commercial arrangement, rather than, well, we'll take you from point A to point B and the price will depend on how long it takes me to do it. There's an awful lot of material out there bashing the billable hour, so I won't go down that route and bring up old miseries. Over the summer holidays, my wife and I, this is probably a sign of terrible parenting, but we've tried to incentivize our kids to do more around the house, and offered them an hourly rate for such tasks. I went out to see my 7-year-old in the back garden with a pair of sort of gardening gloves on. We'd asked him to help with some weeding, and he had one glove on, one glove off, just sort of wafting it around, just hitting the nettles and the weeds that were poking through the cracks in the patio. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, if I take longer, I get more money." And it was sort of bringing together of 15 or 20 years of working with professional services starkly into a 7-year-old frame, that I thought, oh gosh, there is, even at the age of 7, there's an inbuilt incentive here towards inefficiency. So I think having a fixed fee, or at least a value-based commercial component to it, at the very least removes the disincentive for inefficiency, which is a very Weasley way of saying it, rather than saying people are inclined to be inefficient. The incentive is there, whether you like it or not. But I think once you have a proposition that you're clear on, you can then make that somewhat more repeatable. And with inflation of costs driven by the cost of living crisis and the red hot war for talent, if you don't have that repeatability, you just need to keep hiring more and more senior experts that can just think on their feet, bring in more partners, and you end up with a sort of inverse pyramid shaped firm. So I do think these service propositions are critical, not only to growth, but also to efficiency. Again, if we bring in AI, I think AI is going to be phenomenally powerful for all professional services businesses, but it's not a silver bullet in its own right. If you don't have a proposition first, you can't have a somewhat repeatable process. If you don't have something repeatable, then you can't standardize it. If you don't have something standardized, you sure as hell can't automate it. You can't automate something that's all over the place, even with AI. So it is. I refer to it as the key log. I remember one night when we had very young children, I couldn't go to sleep. I was watching the Discovery Channel, and there was a program about Canadian logging firms, which I thought might send me to sleep. And they have this thing, they chop down trees and then they float the logs down the river, down towards the mill for it to be processed. And logs would get sort of snarled up into a bit of a makeshift dam. And engineers would come along, and they, with their expertise, they would look for what's called the key log, which is you pull that log out and all of the other logs start to flow nicely down the river. To me, defining a clear service proposition is the key log. If you address that, your growth can get better, your marketing and BD plans can get better, your approach to lead generation can get better, your approach to operations and process improvement can get better. You can start to use technology more effectively. You can hire the right people that have got the right skills. Everything starts to flow better, but it starts with having a clear proposition or set of propositions.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And just to say, we did do a few episodes ago, we spoke with Sean Jardine, who's the author of Ditch the Billable Hour. So if that's of interest to you, pop on over there. But that's the last we'll say of that. But yeah, and I think also having that service proposition forces you to go back to the things we were saying earlier about really knowing your client inside out. I think that journey of going from point A to B can resonate better when you know these people inside out and you're really specific about who you're talking to. James, what are your tips for creating a good service proposition? What should that look like aside from the structure Darren just mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I think the exercise that we sort of suggest people go away and do, having kind of done this chapter in the Legal MBA, is to create a value ladder, which is to Darren's point in the original framing of the service proposition about, here is the client problem. How do we help them solve it? How do we take them from, I don't know, I've got a problem, potentially through some awareness and some education, through to we're helping you solve the problem, to I no longer have that problem. I think a value ladder, I think, is a really, really good framing of, okay, here is the client's problem. How can we then help that problem at each stage of their journey, and also at different price points? And I think that maybe gives firms a little bit of flexibility around moving towards fixed fees and the billable hour, because you will always get that pushback of, oh, we can't possibly do that, or our clients want the billable hour, they don't. But you have those. I think a value add helps unlock that, because you can start saying, well, you know what, we can do, I don't know, maybe we can do like a low fixed fee diagnostic assessment that helps them understand the breadth and depth of this problem they're experiencing. And then, you know what, yeah, okay, fine, we'll pivot into the traditional hourly rate model for helping them solve it. I think actually, as you start doing that, you realise you can do more and more on fixed fees or value-based fees or alternative fee arrangements. But I think the value ladder framing, the framing at each price point, and each price point would start with free. How do you educate through your approach to marketing? How do you educate people around this? Do you offer free training to clients, etc.? Through sort of a foot in the door service, maybe a low fixed fee offering, and we'll help you understand this problem more specifically to your area. Through to your core offer, what are you fundamentally trying to sell, and then through to things like on-sell services, whether that's cross-selling to other departments or an add-on to the thing you're doing. So I think how do you, I suppose, articulate a service proposition? I think the value ladder exercise we've got in the Legal MBA is a really powerful tool to doing that, and I think it just kind of forces some discipline and some structure around it, and still anchored in, this is the problem we're trying to solve our client, rather than here's the stuff I happen to be selling, right? You still got to conceptually make that flip, otherwise your value ladder just falls to pieces. Too many rungs, too many.
James, I'd say the other thing, it starts to introduce that there are different ways to add value to clients other than the traditional high-end professional service. Yeah. Now, I think it's important to say this is not an alternative to the high-end bill by the hour professional service. Most lawyers that we work with want to do that. They want to have a close working relationship with their clients. They want to work on bespoke problems that really impact their clients. They want the intellectual challenge associated with that, and that's great. For certain bet the house type problems, that's certainly what you should be doing, and partners should be working closely on that. But then there are other problems that clients don't see that have the same amount of value, and we're still trying to service them in the traditional way with high billable hourly rates, a bespoke approach, a bespoke scope, and that might not be the case. That might not be the most appropriate route. So if you take our business, for example, we work very closely with a very small number of highly valued clients, and we work in a fairly bespoke approach. But then there are other things. If you go all the way back down the ladder, we have constantly put things out on social media and LinkedIn, little tips, and on YouTube, sort of the Legal MBA in a minute. Then we have our book, which is relatively low cost. Sounds like a plug. We have our book, which gets across a lot of information for not an awful lot of money. You can move up into the Legal MBA Academy, where more of a monthly subscription based thing, where you've got some live time in a group setting with James and I, and some e-learning modules. And as the value goes up, the price that we charge goes up. But as you go down that ladder, the amount of reach and scale that we have also increases. So we only work with a very small number of clients on a bespoke setting, but there's practically no limit to how many people can buy the book, and there's practically no limit to how many people can sign up to the Legal MBA Academy. They're much more scalable, and we have sort of seen over the years, a lot of firms don't have a problem with growth anymore. They have a problem with scaling. They can grow and grow and grow. They can hire more partners, but their costs grow at a similar rate to their fees. And consulting is exactly the same. So I think that I 100% agree, James. That value ladder approach of thinking, well, what are all the ways that we could add value, including traditional professional services, but it might be some productized services, it might be some products, it might be some digital content. Start thinking about how you can convey value in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's a great tool for law firms to take away today, because I mean, there's probably some super quick wins in there that, yeah, like you said, make sure you scale effectively, but also is a great growth strategy. It also means that those people at the low end, they take less risk working with you, they find out how great you are, and then they're more likely to move up the ladder. I think that's a great technique and practical task that law firms can take away with them today. And so, as you mentioned in the chapter, the service propositions isn't just about driving growth. It isn't just about increasing marketing efforts or anything like that. It is a catalyst for efficiency. You say that if you're not clear on what you're offering and how you add value, everything else about running your practice becomes muddled and difficult. So can you share the impact the service proposition has more so on your internal operations, and I guess how that helps with that scalability? James, we'll come back to you.
Yeah. I mean, so Darren, you touched on it in terms of it enables you to drive that efficiency. I think one of the key threads that kind of runs through the book is this idea of alignment, and the idea that the different elements of the practice group or the firm need to all be pulling in the same direction. So we sort of touched on that to this point. We've spoken about strategy, and this is where we're going, and let's make sure everyone knows which way we're going. We've spoken about kind of focus as an approach. I was going to go to logging. That wasn't our client. That was Canadian. Maybe we'll do Canadian loggers for this one, or chiropractors. Let's do Canadian loggers. Let's see where that goes. So we're going to target Canadian loggers, and here is then the service proposition, the value ladder that articulates what we're doing for Canadian loggers at each kind of price point. Here's free content, here's free value marketing, here's a low cost product, here's a core offer that still might be fixed fee, here's the kind of the high value bespoke stuff on an hourly rate model. I think on the internal operation, and I think the key thing is you don't have that clarity and that alignment. I think that's where you start getting that kind of muddled and difficulty that we reference in the book. So I think actually pretty common examples, I think telling your clients that you're going to respond to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, like just pick up the phone, but then you're telling the staff that you offer them work-life balance and they can clock off early on a Friday. At some point, you're going to have a client that wants to speak to a member of staff on a Saturday, and you've either got a disappointed client or you've got a disappointed member of staff, right? That's just where that's going to get to. Alternatively, the kind of charging the premium prices to clients. We're the best. Our people, right? We spoke about that. Our people are the best, the greatest people that any law firm's ever had. So we charge you the most. But then you're nickel and diming your staff and you're paying them below market rate. Again, over time, the wheels start coming off that, starts unraveling. I think another one, maybe this speaks a little bit more to your world, Amy, is, our firm's really innovative and look at all our AI tools, but actually fundamentally it's built on a practice management system that's 20 years old and is no longer supported by the vendor. I'm sure there are no firms at all in that last category, right? And I think it's that point about consistency. And if you can have that clarity, go, this is what you're doing, it enables you to align where do the internal investments need to go. So if you, to go maybe back up the list, if you are really pitching yourself as innovative, you know what, you probably need to unblock the investment that doesn't enable your practice management system to be updated, to something within the last decade. Let's not even get to where we are today, right? And you know, I think that aligning the value propositions around, or how you present this to clients and how you present this staff is really important. I think actually what we, you know, from my perspective, what we saw through that lockdown pandemic period with that sudden burst of kind of, I think, salaries for qualified lawyers, but also increasing demands on work-life balance. I think we saw, you know, when the mystique of culture and being in the office and rubbing shoulders with partners wears off, and they're just sat grinding out the same documents day in, day out from the space of the home, there's a bit where you kind of go, and I think a lot of lawyers, a lot of fee earners had this realization of, well, you either need to pay me for doing like 2,000 chargeable hours a year, or you need me to give me the time back so that I'm not doing that. But you've got to, one of those kind of immovable things has to, you can't keep expecting me to do, you know, US firm hours, but on regional UK pay. Something's got to give. So I think having that clarity on your service proposition, helps for the client communication, but it really helps internally as well. It helps you articulate where they are. I mean, you touched on it as well, on the growth point around, you can bring in paralegals, solicitor apprentices, juniors to help with some of that fixed fee work and understand the dynamics. They're then building an understanding of the Canadian logging practice that we're building. And then over time, they go on to do the training contract, they move up and they start offering that value to their clients. And they've built that industry experience, they've built that wider experience by going through that value ladder. So I think getting that alignment is really key. And you can't do that if you haven't sort of put pen to paper or said out loud, this is what we're doing, this is our strategy, this is our service proposition. I think in the, you know, in the short term or at the margins, you could have these inconsistencies. You know, practically nothing ever goes like it looks like it does in the PowerPoint deck or in the strategy document, right? But to get to a point where you have that sustainable growth or the scalable growth that Darren mentioned, you've just got to have, and I think you're right, Darren. I think it is that service proposition is sort of the linchpin to the whole thing. So what are you doing and how are you delivering it? I think a lot of it comes out of that for getting the consistency across the different elements.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that it's about, because you think of the service proposition that you're serving your clients, so you're doing it for their benefit, but actually you're making sure that you're doing it for your employees' benefit. And we've already mentioned the rise in costs of talent and the difficulty in hiring and retaining people. Well, if you're all over the shop internally and your culture's all out of whack and it's not aligning with what you're delivering, you're only going to have endless issues there. So yeah, that's a great point to bring to the forefront here. Darren, what are your how does the service proposition impact internal operations from your perspective?
I think what James has covered has been great. I just want to pick on something you've just said there, Amy, about the focus on employees as well. You know, one of the other big drivers at the moment, quite rightly, is on employee well-being. And I know, and James will know, having been a fee earner as well, one of the most stressful times. We always think about when people are really busy, it's really stressful, but the opposite end of the spectrum is really key as well. When you're sat there twiddling your thumbs and maybe it's been 2 weeks or a month or 6 weeks and the work hasn't come in and you feel like a bit of a charlatan because you're not contributing as much, and you see team members who are really busy, that can be just as stressful as not having enough work. I think by having some repeatable service propositions, you can have a bit more of a predictable pipeline of opportunities coming in, and you can have a bit more predictable deal flow as well, which can help to keep people utilized. I'm not talking about, you know, I'm certainly not talking about a factory here, which is always the pushback whenever you start talking about making operations more efficient. We're not a pilot high, sell it cheap factory. We're not doing personal injury claims. Yeah, I get that, but that doesn't mean you can't make your processes more repeatable and more efficient. It's too much of an easy cop out to say no, that's not what we do. There's a big difference between how you position yourself in the market and how you make things work internally. And it's too much of an easy excuse to say, well, if we make things a bit more repeatable and a bit more predictable, we're commoditizing. I mean, I can't begin to say how wrong that statement is. Commoditization is something that happens in the mind of your client. It's not something that happens, you know, on a process flow chart that you draw up back in your office. Your clients will either see what you do as a commodity or they don't. The best way to test whether they see what you offer as a commodity is to think about how often you have to compete purely on the basis of price. If people are saying, well, I can walk down the road to Sprocket and Jones and get this for, you know, half the price or 75%, then you're offering a commodity. That is the economic definition of what a commodity is. If I can buy iron ore from you, Amy, for £100 or $100 a ton, I can buy it from James for $99 a ton, I'm going to buy it from James because there's no difference. So obviously within professional services, we want to wrap a good service around it. We want to, you know, differentiate ourselves and position it appropriately. But there are certain things that are more approaching a commodity than they are approaching a complete you know, bet the house type transaction. And that's what's key here, making the distinction between those things. You can be a firm that offers the bet the house, bet the company style, you know, service, and you can also be a firm that offers repeatable solutions to fairly nagging issues that come up time and time again. But do you know what? I don't want to pay £400 an hour for a partner to solve that for me. Just give me a price, deliver it efficiently, make sure it's right, and address it. David Maister, who was the sort of godfather of thinking around much of professional services management, came up with a sort of medical model of I think he called it pharmacies, nursing, brain surgery, and psychotherapy, and all types of professional services work fit into one of those four categories. I'd probably add a fifth, which is the sort of GP. You know, go and see your GP, and they will triage. Because, you know, if back to my ingrowing toenail, if I know I've got an ingrowing toenail, I'll go and, you know, see a specialist. If I don't know what's wrong with me, I need to go and see a generalist, and then they will triage me to the appropriate point. Quick, get to A&E, or I'm going to refer you to a surgeon, or take 2 of these, go home, and, you know, don't come back. We need to be much clearer about, if we've got 4 or 5 different types of services that are completely different and our clients value them differently, let's have 4 or 5 different operational models to serve them. Let's not have one model, which is you get a partner, it's £400 an hour, it's bespoke, it's open-ended. I'll charge you as long as it takes me. That works for the brain surgery and the psychotherapy. It doesn't work for nursing and pharmacy, and it doesn't work for the GP piece.
Yeah, it's a great point, and that's what I want to sort of move into now, is how you differentiate those operational models. I mean, many of the reports, LPM, Lexis Bellwether, are highlighting that firms are planning to increase their tech spend over the next 12 months. And in your operations chapter, you emphasize that process mapping needs to come before any tech can be put in place. So process maps, they show, and correct me if I'm wrong, they show how a piece of work proceeds from start to finish, using a series of swim lanes to highlight the required actions for each role included. Can you share your tips for creating those process maps to make sure that they're embedded where they need to be before anyone's going and investing in tech tools or improving what they've got? Darren, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, definitely. So this is a question where the answer is people. So a process map, you know, it's essentially going to be a piece of paper that has a representation of what the process is in reality. But in the same way as real life, you know, you have a map and you have the territory. We know intuitively the map is not the territory. A map gives an indication of what the city centre looks like and where the ring roads are and everything else, but you can't drive on the map. In the same way, the process map is not the process. The process is the thing that people do. And unless you go to an infinitesimal level of detail, there will be intricacies in there that the map doesn't pick up. So you need different levels of process maps. There's a whole literature around this, but it's generally accepted that there's sort of 1 to 4 or 5 levels of maps. Level 1 is if you were going to sit down with the managing partner or the chief exec of a firm and explain how something works, not being condescending, that's the level you would use. Work comes in, we do some diagnostic, we do some discovery, we do a bit of legal research, we draft a document, we send it out, it comes back, we exchange, we complete, it's done. That's a level 1 or a level 0 process map. pretty much anyone could understand it, and you're not getting lost in the weeds. You can then break each of those individual process steps. So say it's the legal research piece, you can break that down to level 2, 3, 4, or 5. And I'll go to the extreme example. Level 5 would be the detailed steps that someone would do, all the way down to, right, you put your username in this field, you put your password in here, you click on this tab, that'll open up this, open that box, do this, da, 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 da. And if everything fits nicely together, you have a high level map, which, think of that as, hopefully I've got a globe right behind me, you can see that. Yeah, that would be a high level map. Yeah, the level 5 map would be perhaps, I don't know, Google Street View, where you're seeing in everybody's individual windows. You don't need to go into that level of detail for every single one of the steps. And in some cases, you can't. Within any legal process, there will be things that are somewhat repeatable, and then there will be some things that are, do you know what, I just need to get in front of someone, look in the whites of their eyes, I'm going to interrogate them or negotiate with them, or I'm going to advocate them for them in court, or I'm going to do this, that, or the other. Can't really write a detailed process around that, because it's based on decades and decades of experience. So because you can't do a process map for that, don't try. Almost like the old-fashioned maps of they be beasties here, unexplored territory, don't go there. You sort of treat that as a black box of, there's a bunch of stuff here that's repeatable that we can use technology to make more efficient. Let's use the technology to make that more repeatable and more efficient. And then there's some brain surgery stuff over here that we just have to trust our experts to do. Again, going back to the medical model, there's similar sorts of things. There are checklists for open heart surgery, believe it or not, just to make sure that you've done everything. But really, once the surgeon is there and they've opened somebody up, they're on their own. He or she is dealing with what they've got in front of them. And to be completely honest, I don't want someone thumbing through a manual while they're doing that. I want them to just know, I've encountered this problem, I've solved it before, this is how I do it. Having said that, when it comes to decontaminating the operating theatre that I'm going into, I don't really want any of that left up to chance. I do want there to be a step-by-step checklist. I want there to be a process. When it comes to booking my surgery in, I want there to be a process around that. I want there to be a system around it. I want a little text update to say, Mr. Me, we're expecting you in 45 minutes, or whatever else. So it's trying to find the bits of the process where it would benefit from being more standardized, more automated, more efficient, and the bits that are magic, fairy dust, brain surgery, and leave that alone. Just let the experts get on with it. But what you'll find is, if you make the drudgery more efficient, the experts have more time to focus on the stuff that they're really good at. And quite frankly, again, most lawyers are really bright people. It's the stuff that they get an intellectual challenge from, a bit of a buzz from. They don't want to be doing the drudgery. Surgeons don't want to be booking their own theatre and decontaminating the scalpels and beds and all that sort of stuff. So it's back to Adam Smith's division of labour principle. And you can do that without commoditizing. Quite the opposite. You make your experts' time even more valuable and focused on only the high-end activities.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. And I think a lot of the pushback to these automation tools is often that we can't automate some of these processes. They're bespoke every time. And I think that's a great way to say, yeah, cool, let's leave those where they are. But there's going to be top level things that you can roll up. James, what's your tips for creating effective process maps?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to Darren's point, I think start at the high level, start at the 10,000 foot view. I think, and maybe to a specific bit about tech, I think where it can go wrong is you kind of go, oh, here's this bit of tech. Every other firm's using it, we should use it, let's go use it. And it's very, very specific. I think a lot of the technology solutions that we call legal tech in the sector are very, very specific point solutions. Yes, there's practice management, there's case management systems, but there's the very specific, the e-discovery tool, the court bundling tool, the searching the land registry and doing an initial report tool. If you don't understand, and by you I mean, I suppose the royal we, do you get royal you? Sort of the broader practice. If you can't articulate that 10,000 foot view of, what, this piece of legal work has 5 steps, and this legal tool impacts step 3. So then we'll go into the detail to say, okay, which specifically, how does that impact step 3? I think that's when you start getting unstuck and you start, kind of throwing tech into problems that may or may not be there. You have business cases that aren't written, that aren't realized, that aren't utilized. So, but I think, to Darren's point, start at the top and then work out where the impact is, to then work out. And actually, a lot of the time you don't need to get into the detail of, well, in this version of the software, the button's blue and we press it here, and in the next version it's pink and we press it there. But I think just that kind of articulation of where does it fit in, what then is the impact. And I think this is a really important point for me around process maps. For me, they're a communication tool, and very importantly, they're a change management tool often, and so you typically have 2 versions. You have your current state and your future state. This is what it is before we put the tech in, or how we work now, and this is what it looks like afterwards. If you have no articulation now, or no shared understanding of how we work now versus how we expect to work in 3 months' time when we put this piece of technology in, your change management, you don't have a change management plan. The whole thing will fall to pieces. You'll just be reacting to users going, it's not doing what I think, and all the rest of it. So I think actually process maps are a really foundational point to that change management piece, and that communication of, on Friday night, your world looks like this, and on Monday morning, we're deploying this tool and it will look like that. And here are your training guides or whatever to help you support you through that. Without that articulation, you will do more work after the go live than you would have done pre-go live by doing that kind of process mapping exercise. But to Darren's point, start at the top and then work out where you need to go into detail. Resist the urge to just go to sort of the nth degree or the level 4 or 5 process maps from the start.
I mean, we know change management is a key challenge in any sort of process change or tech change or investment, and I love that tool. I actually might be stealing it as a communication to say, this is where we are now and this is where we want to be. I think that's a great visualization of how to manage that change, and it makes it really clear of where these tools help, where things aren't going to change, where you're still going to have your processes from before. I think that's a brilliant tip, and one that I don't know why I hadn't thought of before, so I'm stealing that one.
It's almost the equivalent of drawing a blueprint or architecture plans before you start laying bricks. You make the mistakes on paper, not in reality, and it just helps to flush out, even within a small team of say 5 people. When you start to map out the process, and you either do it individually with people or you get people in the same room. James will 100% agree with me. The number of times over the years we've done that, and you have 5 different answers. When you get to that, how do you do this? Oh, well, I do it this way. Oh, well, we're in this office, we do it that way. Like, well, why are we bothering putting in a tech tool? Why don't we just agree on one best way of doing it? Unless there are real reasons why we should do it differently. But because you're sat in Bristol and I'm sat in London, that shouldn't be a reason why we have a fundamentally different process. So flushing out that process standardization before the day of go live, and the person in Bristol realizes, oh, this is following the London process, not the Bristol process. Like, just get it out on the table nice and early, and you'll end up with a better process, a better system go live, and happier clients and happier staff.
Yeah, and better ROI on that tech that you're choosing to use. We know that's a key problem as well.
Yeah.
I think a key theme in our conversation and the book as a whole really is that importance of prioritization. You say that it's your superpower to turbocharge, it's difficult, to turbocharge your effectiveness. And I think, as we've discussed today, I think that focus and prioritization is absolutely key. You share many areas to tackle. In fact, I think every chapter is about prioritization, but I want to focus on, of course, tips for automating those tasks. So as we've just mentioned, once you've got your process maps, it helps you to implement those tools to automate and scale those processes. How can firms decide what is worth automating? We may have already answered that question, but James, I'll come back to you.
Yeah, and maybe to pick up on your kind of ROI comment, but really you're looking for bang for buck. For any automation, for any project, there's going to be an upfront investment in time of money into tools, but actually a lot is time. It's fee earner time. But how do you do this? What impact will it have? To the comments we made previously about, there are finite resources. You only have so many fee earners you can put in a workshop to work out how you're going to automate a particular task. So really you want to be optimizing for kind of bang for buck. What will require a little effort to do the act of automating the creation or the installation of a tool versus the benefit that it will give, the time saving it will give, or whatever the automation is designed to achieve. And you should always be looking for those kind of time savings from the automation to be greater than the time you spent in doing the automation. Otherwise, you would have been better not doing it, just carrying on doing the manual process. And so if you're optimizing for bang for buck, really there are two areas I'd look for. One is high frequency tasks, so stuff that happens a lot. So all else being equal, the task that is done multiple times a day is going to be a better candidate for automating than the one that's, whatever, performed once on a blue moon, but only if it is Tuesday with a 6 in the day of the month, right? Go for high frequency. And the other one is the tasks that take a long time to actually do. So the task that takes 6 hours for a person to complete is more valuable than the task that takes 2 minutes or seconds for an individual to complete. And so particularly if you're going through an exercise of like flushing out lots of ideas, to sort of heat map that sort of classic management consulting, right? I love a 2x2 matrix, but if you're kind of plotting, frequency versus time savings or time intensity of the tasks, anything that's high frequency and time intensive, that's where you really want to ideally be targeting your efforts for the automation, and not, the really quick task that happens once every year. It takes a couple of seconds. And then there's going to be shades of grey in between those two extremes. But frankly, you can then prioritise, and you can say, do you know what, the bang for buck point, we've got 10 ideas. These two are absolute no-brainers. It'll save us, so much time. We should just crack on and do it. These are the ones we've looked into it. There's just no case to answer. It's going to take us longer to create the automation than it'll ever save, or the payback will be 20 years and we'll all have given up before then. And then you have the bit in the middle where you could just kind of do a straightforward ranking, and then it comes down to that kind of prioritization of resource to say, yeah, we've done items 1 and 2 on our list. Now let's tackle 3, let's tackle 4, let's tackle 5. So yeah, if you can kind of get some clarity around how long does the task take, and how frequently does that task take place, that should give you your pretty good running list as to what you should be focusing your automation efforts on.
Yeah, it feels very simple and doable.
At the risk of this sounding like a shameless plug, I did just pull the book. I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but we've got a nice little grid in chapter 6, which is that how often is the task done and how long does it take? Clearly the place you want to be, those things that you do all the time and take a lot of time, that they'd be no-brainers. And then somewhere, I think we've got a red, amber, green thing on it. Yeah, the amber things are we do them 10 times a day, but they only take 6 minutes. Well, maybe that's worth doing, maybe it's not. You need a bit of judgment somewhere around there. But there will clearly be somewhere it's like we do this, it takes 6 minutes a day, we do it once a year. For God's sake, don't do it. I refer to it as the Jurassic Park problem. Amy, I'm afraid you're probably too young to remember the very first original Jurassic Park movie, but Jeff Goldblum has a lovely line in that where he says, we spent so much time figuring out, could we do it? We didn't stop to think, should we? And that's often the case with automation within professional services businesses. The focus is, could we automate this? Yes, let's do it. Not should we? So if Jeff Goldblum helps to save just one failed IT system implementation, then I know he's done his job, as well as saving us all from dinosaurs.
I mean, what a great way to end the podcast on a Jurassic Park quote. I think that's perfect for me. But thank you both. We could talk forever, because now I want to ask you questions about who's responsible for all this stuff, who's spearheading all this stuff. We really could talk for hours. So thank you so much both for sharing your expertise and your experience with us to help firms master the business of law. The book is, of course, out now. It covers all these topics and more, plus practical advice, really great diagrams. It's really practical in there. So yeah, worth purchasing. It's out now. So thank you, James. Thank you, Darren, for your time today. It's been really great.